My name is Lucas Almeida. I'm 34 years old, and what I'm about to tell you will seem like madness. For a long time, I avoided talking about this because I knew no one would believe me. But I reached a point where I could no longer keep this to myself. It's a story that completely changed my view of reality. It all started 3 years ago when I worked as a railway maintenance engineer. It was a job I loved. I'd been fascinated by trains since childhood. I worked for a company that maintained one of the oldest railway lines in the region, a line that cut through mountains and valleys, connecting small towns that depended on this transportation. At that time, I was going through a difficult period in my personal life. I had separated from my wife 6 months earlier and was living alone in a small apartment near the central station. Work became my refuge. I spent hours examining the tracks, checking signals, maintaining the infrastructure that kept everything running. It was on a rainy Tuesday in September that it all began. I was doing a routine inspection on an isolated section of a line, about 40 kilometers from the city. It was a place known as Crow's Curve, a nickname the older employees gave it because of the dark mountains that rose on both sides of the tracks, creating a narrow valley where crows were always flying in circles. I was checking some signaling cables when I heard the unmistakable sound of an approaching train. I looked at my watch. It was 2:15 in the afternoon. I frowned. According to my schedule, there shouldn't be any train passing through there at that time. The next one was scheduled for 4 in the afternoon. I grabbed my radio and called the control center. Control, this is Daniel. Is there any unscheduled train heading to Crow's Curve? I can hear one approaching. The response took a few seconds. Negative, Daniel. No trains off schedule. Are you sure of what you're hearing? The sound was getting louder. It was definitely a train, and it seemed to be moving fast. I'm sure. I can hear it clearly. I'm getting off the tracks as a precaution. I moved away to a safe area and waited. The sound continued to grow, that familiar rhythm of metal on metal, the distant whistle echoing through the mountains. But then, something strange happened. The sound simply stopped. It didn't gradually diminish like when a train passes. It simply ceased, as if someone had turned off a radio. I stood there with my heart racing. I looked both ways down the line. There was nothing. No train, no sign that anything had passed. I called the control center again. Control, the train had stopped. I don't see anything here. Daniel, our systems show no activity in that section. Are you sure it wasn't a truck on the road above? I looked up. There was a secondary road winding through the mountain, but it was too far away to confuse with the sound of a train on tracks. Besides, I knew the difference. I'd been working with trains for 10 years. No, it was definitely a train. I'll finish the inspection and return. I spent the rest of the day restless. That night, I couldn't sleep properly. I kept thinking about the sound I had heard and how it had stopped so abruptly. The next day, I returned to the same spot, but this time I brought a camera. I wanted to document anything strange that might happen. For a week, nothing happened. I began to think that maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. After all, I was going through a lot of stress with the separation. But then, the following Tuesday, at exactly the same time, it happened again. 2:15 in the afternoon. The same approaching sound. This time, I was prepared. I turned on the camera and called the control center immediately. Control, it's happening again. I'm recording. Received, Daniel. Our sensors show nothing, but stay in contact. The sound got louder, closer. My hand trembled as I held the camera. And then, to my complete surprise, I saw something that made me question my own sanity. A train appeared around the curve. It wasn't a modern train like the ones I was used to seeing. It was an old locomotive, the kind you'd see in old movies, black, with a large chimney, releasing steam, dark wooden cars. It looked like it had come from another era, from decades past. But the strangest thing wasn't its vintage appearance. It was the fact that while I could see it perfectly, the camera in my hand showed nothing on the screen. I looked at the viewfinder. The tracks appeared empty, but when I raised my eyes, there was the train, moving silently in my direction. My heart raced. I ran away from the tracks, stumbling over some stones. The train passed by me at moderate speed, and for the first time, I could see details that disturbed me even more. There were people at the windows of the cars. Pale faces looking at me as they passed. Men in dark suits, women with old-fashioned hats, even some children. They all watched me with serious, melancholic expressions. No one waved, no one smiled. They just looked at me with a deep sadness that touched me to the bone. The train had about 6 cars, and when the last one passed by me, it simply disappeared. It wasn't gradual. It was as if it evaporated into thin air. One second it was there, the next it had vanished completely. I stood there trembling, holding a camera that had recorded only empty tracks and my own heavy breathing. I tried to call the control center, but my hands were shaking so much I dropped the radio. When I finally managed to pick it up, I could barely form coherent words. Control. I saw a train. An old train. With passengers. Daniel, are you okay? You sound shaken. I'm coming back to base. I need to show you the recording. Back at the station, my supervisor, Carlos, received me with concern. He was an older man who had worked with railways for more than 30 years. When I explained what had happened and showed him the recording, which, as expected, showed nothing but empty tracks, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Daniel, you need a few days off. You're under a lot of stress with the separation. Carlos, I know what I saw. It was real. I saw people on that train. He sighed and sat heavily in his chair. Daniel, sit down. There's something I need to tell you. The tone in his voice scared me. I sat and waited. You're not the first person to report something like this at Crow's Curve. Actually, there have been several reports over the years. Always on Tuesdays, always at 2:15. I felt a chill running up my spine. What? Why didn't anyone tell me this before? Because the company has a policy. Any employee who reports these incidents is automatically suspended for psychological evaluation. Most never return to work. My mind began to process the implications. But do you believe? Do you believe what I'm saying? Carlos was silent for a long moment, looking out the window. 43 years ago, when I was still young like you, I also saw that train. The revelation hit me like a punch to the stomach. You saw it. I did. And just like you, I tried to record, tried to document. I never could. That train, it seems to exist somewhere between what we know as reality and something else. But who are these people? Why are they there? Carlos got up and went to an old file cabinet in the corner of the room. He took out a yellowed folder and placed it on the table between us. These are old records from before the current company took over this line. Documents I found when I started working here. I opened the folder with trembling hands. There were old photographs, handwritten documents, faded newspaper clippings. One of the photographs immediately caught my attention. It was the same locomotive I had seen, surrounded by a group of people dressed exactly like those I saw at the windows. This photo is from 1987, said Carlos. It was the last regular passenger train that operated on this line. It made the route between the mountain towns, carrying workers, families, children. I continued leafing through the documents. There was a newspaper report that made my blood run cold. Passenger train mysteriously disappears. 47 people on board. I quickly read the article. The train had departed on a Tuesday in September at 2 in the afternoon, carrying 47 passengers on a routine trip. Witnesses reported having seen the train pass through several stations, but it never reached its final destination. An extensive search was conducted, but neither the train nor the passengers were found. It was as if they had simply disappeared from the face of the earth. This happened exactly where you had your experience, said Carlos. Crow's Curve was the last place where the train was seen by reliable witnesses. I felt a lump in my throat. Are you saying that the people I saw were the missing passengers? I don't know what I'm saying, Daniel. I only know that several people, over the years, have reported the same thing. Always the same train, always the same characteristics, always on Tuesdays at 2:15. I spent the following days immersed in those documents. Carlos gave me access to the old files, and I began to put together a more complete picture of what had happened. The missing train was making its regular weekly route. On board were workers returning home, families visiting relatives, students returning from school. Among the documents, I found passenger lists with names and ages. Maria de Silva, 34 years old, teacher. João Oliveira, 45 years old, carpenter. Ana Costa, 8 years old, student. Ordinary people with ordinary lives who simply disappeared. I also discovered that the apparitions weren't random. They seemed to happen more frequently during periods of high emotional pressure for those who witnessed them. Employees going through divorces, family problems, significant losses. It was as if the train appeared to those who somehow connected with the sadness and melancholy that radiated from it. The following Tuesday, I returned to Crow's Curve. This time, I didn't bring a camera. Instead, I brought one of the old passenger photographs and a folding chair. I wanted to be prepared to really observe, not just document. At 2:15, there it was again. The old train materialized around the curve as if emerging from another dimension. This time, I forced myself to remain calm and observe carefully. The passengers at the windows seemed clearer now. I could see their faces more clearly. A middle-aged woman with a scarf on her head observed me for a long moment. Our eyes met, and I felt a wave of deep sadness, but also of gratitude. When the train passed, I raised the photograph I had brought. It was the same woman, Maria de Silva, the 34-year-old teacher who was returning home on that fateful Tuesday decades ago. The train slowed down. For an impossible moment, it seemed like it was going to stop. The woman at the window, Maria, raised her hand in a gentle gesture. It wasn't a wave, but something more subtle, more significant. It was recognition. Then, as always, the train disappeared. But this time, something had changed. I felt a strange peace, a sensation that I had established some kind of connection. During the following weeks, I began to research more about the missing passengers. I discovered that many of them had left families behind, spouses, children, parents who spent decades not knowing what had happened to their loved ones. That's when I had an idea that would change everything. I began to track down the descendants of the missing passengers. It wasn't easy. Many families had moved, changed names, or simply tried to forget. But gradually, I managed to find some people. The first was Elena, Maria de Silva's granddaughter. She lived in a nearby town and worked as a nurse. When I called her, there was a long silence on the line. "You want to talk about my grandmother?" "Yes." "I know it may seem strange, but I believe I've seen something related to the train she disappeared on." We arranged to meet at a cafe. Elena was a woman of about 40 years old, with kind but sad eyes. When I told her my story, she listened in silence, tears streaming down her face. "My mother spent her whole life wondering what had happened to her own mother," she said. "She died never knowing the truth. She always said she felt as if grandmother was still out there, somewhere." I showed her the old photograph. Elena covered her mouth with her hands. "It's her. It's exactly how she described her when I was a child, based on my mother's memories." I convinced Elena to come with me the following Tuesday. I was nervous. I didn't know if the train would appear to other people or if it was something specific to me. But I felt I needed to try. The following Tuesday, Elena and I were at Crow's Curve at 2 o'clock. She was visibly nervous, squeezing my hands tightly. At 2:15, the familiar sound began. Elena's eyes widened. "Are you hearing this?" "I am," I replied. The train appeared around the curve, as always. But this time, something was different. It seemed more solid, more real. Elena gasped when she saw the old locomotive. It's real. It's really real." We watched as the train approached. When it got close to us, it slowed down significantly. At the windows, the passengers watched us. And then Elena screamed, "Grandma." The woman at the window, Maria, looked directly at Elena. Her face, which had always seemed melancholic to me, lit up with something I can only describe as pure joy. She placed her hand on the window glass and smiled, the first smile I had seen on that train. Elena ran toward the train, but I held her back. "Don't get close to the tracks," I warned. Maria waved to Elena, then pointed to her own heart and then to Elena. The gesture was clear. I love you. Elena was crying, but they were tears of relief, not sadness. The train began to accelerate again, but before disappearing completely, Maria did something she had never done before. She opened the window and threw something out. A small object fell near our feet. When the train disappeared, Elena and I ran to see what it was. On the ground was a small metal brooch, exactly like the one Elena said her mother always described that her grandmother used to wear. At that moment, we both understood something profound. The train passengers weren't lost. They were waiting. Waiting for recognition, for remembrance, for a connection with the loved ones they had left behind. In the following weeks, Elena and I worked together to find more descendants. We managed to locate relatives of other passengers, children, grandchildren, nephews. Each Tuesday, we brought 1 or 2 people with us. Each time a descendant recognized their loved one on the train, something magical happened. The passengers seemed brighter, happier. Some waved, others threw small objects, always something that had special meaning for the family. After 2 months of doing this, I noticed a gradual change in the train. Some cars seemed less dense, less solid. It was as if the passengers were departing. On the 12th Tuesday, when we brought Roberto, grandson of the missing train's engineer, something extraordinary happened. The train appeared as always, but this time, when it stopped near us, the engineer, an elderly man with a thick mustache, got out of the locomotive. He walked up to Roberto and placed his hand on his grandson's shoulder. Roberto could feel it. It wasn't just visual. The engineer spoke, and his voice seemed to come from far away. Thank you for remembering us. Thank you for not forgetting us. Then he returned to the locomotive. The train began to move, but this time, instead of disappearing abruptly, it gradually became transparent, as if dissolving in the sunlight. The passengers at the windows waved to us, all of them, for the first time. They were farewell gestures, but also of gratitude. And then, finally, the train disappeared completely. The following Tuesday, Elena and I returned to Crow's Curve. At 2:15, we waited. There was no sound. There was no train. For the first time in decades, Crow's Curve was truly silent. In the months that followed, I realized that my life had changed profoundly. The experience with the train taught me something about connection, about the importance of remembering, about how love transcends even our understanding of reality. Elena and I became close friends, united by this extraordinary experience. We set up a small memorial at Crow's Curve. Nothing official, just a simple plaque with the names of the 47 missing passengers. We planted wildflowers around it, flowers that grow naturally in that mountainous region. Other railway employees sometimes ask about the memorial. We tell them it's to honor the passengers of a train that was lost long ago. Most accept this simple explanation. A few, those who perhaps have had their own inexplicable experiences, look at us with silent understanding. Carlos retired last year, but before leaving, he handed me all the old files. You understand the importance of this now, he said. Keep them. You never know when someone else might need the truth. Today, when I pass by Crow's Curve during my regular inspections, I feel a peace I had never experienced before. The place is no longer haunted by sadness. It's blessed by honored memories and recognized love. Sometimes I wonder if other people will have similar experiences in other places, with other unsolved mysteries. I believe they will. I believe there are many things in this world that we cannot explain with our limited understanding of reality. The story of the train that disappeared without a trace taught me that some mysteries don't need to be solved in the traditional sense. Sometimes they just need to be honored, remembered, recognized. And when that happens, both the living and those who have departed find peace. To this day, I keep the brooch that Maria threw to Elena. It's a physical reminder that true love never really disappears. Sometimes it just needs to find a new way to express itself. And if you ever hear about something inexplicable, something that defies your understanding of the world, don't immediately dismiss it as impossible. Sometimes the impossible is just another word for what we don't yet understand. And sometimes understanding isn't as important as simply accepting and honoring. The train disappeared, but its story lives on. And maybe that's what really matters, not the mystery itself, but the human connections it reveals and the lessons it teaches us about love, loss, remembrance, and the complex nature of the reality we inhabit. This is my story. It's strange, inexplicable, and I know many won't believe it. But it's true, at least for me, for Elena, and for the families who were finally able to say goodbye to their lost loved ones. And who knows? Maybe there are still other trains out there, waiting to be remembered, waiting for someone who has enough courage to look beyond what we think is possible and find the extraordinary truths that hide in the shadows of our ordinary world.